Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting edition of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Vaughn Smith, and this is our Cisco Cloud Fundamentals series, and we're continuing through our cloud networking topic. And in this episode, we're going to talk about virtual application containers. And I can't contain my excitement, so we're just going to go ahead and say, hey, Ronnie, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing great, Vaughn. Thank you again for joining us as we continue in our series. And now we are taking a look at this idea of the virtual application containers. I know, very exciting topic. Most people are very excited about virtual application containers. And Vaughn is actually the most excited person I've ever seen about virtual application containers.
I am too, because I don't know what they are.
Yeah, there you go. So that's
you're going to tell me.
Yeah, that's a good place for us to start then. Okay. So Vaughn, when it comes down to the idea here of what in the world virtual application containers are, well, remember that even as we're moving into the cloud, okay, there's still a lot of different components, a lot of pieces that we have to actually be able to put together to make everything work the way that we want it to. Okay. So for instance, right, the idea of just running a VM in the cloud is not enough. We still have to make sure that we can network them the way that we need to. We still need to make sure that we can have the storage that we need to make it work as well, security that we need to make it work. And Vaughn, all by itself, those individual pieces, they don't just click together, okay? We have to get them configured correctly. In the cloud, we have to make sure that they are provisioned. In other words, they're assigned to where we are, so that we can also make them work as well. Now, when it comes down to running an application, though, Vaughn, if we go back again several years ago, we ran applications directly on our own laptops or our own desktops, right? You would get a laptop like what I have, buy the application, install it on the laptop itself, and once that would actually end up working, then, of course, you would connect your laptop into the network. You'd probably get an IP address with a default gateway and all the other stuff that comes with it, so that now you can actually connect your application and retrieve data, make it work, make it do the interaction that we actually want to do, does everything that we need to, okay? But Vaughn, all that's actually been handled fairly automatically over time. Well, Vaughn, now that we've moved into the cloud, that stuff now becomes more challenging again, because no longer do we have that ability to sit there and say, all right, so here's what this should connect to in this way and that way and on all this, because I can actually just see and physically touch everything that I can when it's physical. When it's in the cloud, we have to use some type of portal management interface and configure them the way that we need to. And we just really trust that it's going to work the way that we need it to, okay? So Vaughn, once we move in that idea of it being as much hidden, but still working in the background, sometimes gives us a little bit of distrust at the beginning because we're not exactly sure how that ends up working out. But also the challenge of it is this. Vaughn, if I actually get some of the things working, it's very much easier for me, especially in the cloud environment, not to consider some of the things that should be there because it's not in front of me, right? I can't go back and say, all right, I've got the application, I've got the laptop, it's configured with not, I can't do that just by, taking a look visually and it actually doing that for me. It essentially means I have to remember, I have to be able to know where to verify to make this happen. Now, for a cloud provider, though, okay, if they're going to start doing this for tenants at least, right, they have to ensure then that every single tenant can get access to the things that they want to get access to. Once again, the applications that they need to get access to, the ability for them to deploy virtual machines that only affect their tenant and not anybody else has to be there as well. We have to ensure that they can set up security for themselves to isolate them from other tenants that may be on our particular network if we're actually doing that. And we also have to ensure for, of course, every individual tenant that we might have to have the proper SLA, okay, to actually be able to deal with things like compliance issues and security policies. So now all of a sudden that means I can have multiple tenants, but they may have different levels of promise that I'm actually guaranteeing them because they're paying for different amounts of services. So a great example of this, Vaughn, is if we were to go to something like AWS, okay, and we were to launch up a virtual machine, we have this ability to launch up some that are on their free tier, which again doesn't cost us anything at all. But Vaughn, if you realized you needed a virtual machine that had more in terms of performance, it might cost you, well, a lot more per hour, okay, besides zero. Let's say it can cost you, let's say $10 an hour, or even higher than that to actually be able to run and do what you actually need them to do, okay? So in a virtual environment then, okay, that ability for us to be able to do that is not only a great thing, but the virtual environment and the cloud environment also brings us back to that definition. We have elasticity. So Vaughn might actually say, what I need to do though is I need this type of machine, but only for the next 6 hours. But Vaughn, after those 6 hours though, you don't need it anymore. Well, in the cloud, we actually can take that away. In other words, we can actually go ahead and stop using it anymore, terminate that instance or get rid of it, and then Vaughn's not charged for that with that anymore. So with the idea of elasticity is what we're talking about. It's the ability to quickly be able to change and to maintain what we need to, okay, and to actually be able to have the isolation that we need fairly quickly, okay, and actually right there on the spot if necessary. So in the earliest days of cloud deployment and of cloud solutions that we have, we did some of this, especially the idea of isolation, okay, of being able to offer the tenants what we needed to by using traditional networking concepts and technologies, okay? And the initial one that we can talk about here is something that we call VRF, okay, which is our virtual routing and forwarding. So this is just a straight concept, and we're not really showing anything overall, but it allows me to be able to take a router, okay, just a regular router from Cisco, and instead of it actually having a single routing table, I can have two different routing tables running on the same router that only responds to isolated traffic. So Vaughn can have one tenant on VLAN 10, and Vaughn can have another tenant on VLAN 20 running across the same router, but they would only see their own routing table across the whole thing. They wouldn't see their neighbor's routing table. They wouldn't even know that those routes actually exist as well. In the cloud environment as well, we would need to establish what we call a firewall context. And that's the Cisco terminology for a virtual firewall. They call it a firewall context. And in this firewall context, which I can't say, okay, it allows for every tenant to face their own particular security administration that they want to that protects their network. Because if I were to implement this as a default policy, it might be great for some, but it might be terrible for others. So we need to be able to deploy that as well and to allow that to work and to allow for, of course, administration of that from the actual, for the actual tenant too. So they can do what they need to. Also, of course, management of IP addresses, all that can actually be up to them if we choose to as well. And then we can also take a look at the idea of ADC, which is our application delivery controller, is also going to be needed for every single tenant as well. Now, there are many different devices that help us to do all that. But Vaughn, if we don't know exactly how that ends up working out together, it becomes a little bit more challenging. So what Cisco has essentially done is said, so before we actually think about other things like this, okay, we want to start grouping some of these things together so that they actually work a little bit better for us and make sure that the tenants can get what they need to and can be supplied with everything that they need. So when they started doing that, all that technology that we talked about, such as the virtual routing and forwarding, the firewall context, the application delivery controller, all those things were now turned around, and Cisco actually created a particular, a software that helps us to manage all that, called, of course, the virtual application containers. Okay. Now, it essentially is grouping all the stuff together that we need to make it work the way that we need. Now, depending on how comfortable that we are, it can be a combination of things. For example, inside of this idea of the virtual application container system that's out there, so you also see the term or the acronym VAX for everything, okay? So when you see something like that, it can include VMs. It can, of course, include the VXLANs that actually might need to be done, any of the networking services that we actually have, okay? Now, not only that, though, Vaughn, okay? The other goal behind it is to ensure that we do what cloud networking says we can do, which is the elasticity behind that. So, Vaughn, we can assign certain levels of things so that you can scale them out if you need to. So, Vaughn, you might start off with something fairly small. But if you say, hey, I need to build this up very quickly and add in more and more machines, you should have the ability to have your on-demand portal where you can spin up more and more of these devices as you need to. And then when you don't need them anymore, you should also independently, without having to come to me, is to remove them as well. So that virtual application container also gives us the ability to do that. Okay. So that's where we're actually heading and going with this. Now, most of us, we can't envision what we're talking about here in this sense. So I tried to bring up like a real world example of how things used to happen. So Vaughn, in the cloud environment, and I tried to look for this so that we could show it on our episode here. But it used to be where you had different levels of how you could get access into the cloud. Okay, so you used to have something like a gold tier, just as an example, right, and a silver tier, and maybe the regular user tier, and then you had where you could actually get everything, okay, that you wanted. It might be platinum tier or whatever it might be. Okay, well, today it's very hard for us to be able to do that. Okay? And the reason why is that most of the cloud providers that are out there, especially the public cloud providers, they actually just offer each and every individual service by itself. Okay, so let's take a look at something before I go back to that virtual application container. I'm just going to bring up Amazon Web Services here, AWS, Amazon.com. Okay, so we're not actually going into it, but so I used to actually think, oh, we'll just take a look at solutions here. And now when you take a look at solutions, they give you a by case use, by organization type. So we'll just go to enterprise. And then I used to see like different tiers that you could do with the enterprise and support measures and whatever else here. But now all that's pretty much gone. Okay. They just kind of separate out into what they need. But it used to be where if you need these services, but you don't need these, you can kind of pick and choose what you want. And as I think about it, Vaughn, IT Pro TV still follows the same type of service, right? We have our standard account and we have the premium account with IT Pro TV. Well, the premium includes what? A lot more services, okay? Whereas standard account, it includes good services, but it doesn't include everything that we have.
A lot of these places, or a lot of different businesses, have like the comparison charts,
Right.
where it has like the columns with the check boxes and how far they go down for offering more services.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because I found something that was close, but this is not exactly the same as networking services here. But for us in the platform service, Office 365 is exactly like what Vaughn was explaining here. Okay, so we have different tiers, but remember that Office 365 for us, essentially an application as a platform is what it gives us. So as we scroll through, you can see just even by the icons that's on my screen here. Okay, you can see that this one over here has some. This one has very little by comparison. These two others over here have pretty much just about everything that's actually available, but this last one definitely has more.
And that's why we actually had to purchase some of these like higher licenses because of some of the things we needed to do for like your the Office 365 like administrator type of role. You couldn't do it with like that base account.
Right.
You needed certain things within those E3 and E5
Yeah.
level subscriptions.
Yeah, so I went ahead and I just clicked on the enterprise solution so that we could see all the advanced ones. But if you go to the business and to the individual, you won't see this many options. But you get the sense that there's a lot more solutions here. So what Vaughn was showing us, right, and talked about the listing of some of the different ones. So if I continue to scroll down in this 4-column list, you can see, Vaughn, over here on the left-hand side, that this first list just kind of peters out and disappears after a while. And then the other ones continue to actually scroll and go on down. And even after a while, that third column seems to also have disappeared, where that fourth column continues to go on and on and on until you get to this point where it says, oh, look, what's also included is 24/7 phone and web support. It's pretty darn good when you start to take a look at solutions like this and get this, okay? Now, in the same way, as a service provider, you can do the same thing for your clients if you're actually doing that as well, okay? So you can set up tiered types of services like this. And the way that you would traditionally do it, as far as the Cisco technique goes, is using the virtual application containers to give you what levels of service that you want to be able to provide. Okay. Now, Vaughn, like everything else in the cloud, things change rapidly, and over time they change rapidly, even during the middle of shows. Sometimes, okay, that we've actually been recording, they change. All of a sudden, the interface changes. All of a sudden, certain things that were actually named something at one time is now gone. It's named something else. You name it, those changes happen. Well, in the Cisco world, we've already seen at least one time where before, Vaughn, we were talking about the Cisco Intercloud Fabric, okay, is what we were talking about. But then as the exam came out, they got rid of it.
It's Cloud Center
It's
now.
Cloud Center. Yeah, it is Cloud Center. Good job, Vaughn. Okay, so Cloud Center is what it's now become. And of course, Vaughn, as we start talking about the virtual application container is here, okay, which go, all right, that sounds pretty cool. Oh, there is end of sale, end of life announcement for, oh, look at that, Vaughn. Virtual
Oh.
application container
Oh,
services.
yay.
Yeah.
Oh, good job.
Yeah, sometimes you just can't win. Okay. So Vaughn normally, okay, when something like this happens, especially for so this actually ended at October.
Oh, wait, that was
yeah, 2 years.
2018.
Yeah, 2017.
okay. Oh, yeah,
and
I
then,
was
yeah.
looking up. I just saw
Yeah,
January
this is
11th.
the last time you're actually supposed to sell it.
Ah.
Okay, so that's the last time you're supposed
Okay.
to sell it. But its real support was here. So if you had supplies and stock, some inventory still on hand, you could sell it.
Oh, there's the last day of support.
Right, last day of
is
support.
2021.
Yes.
I think that's the last
Yeah,
one.
there it is. Yep. So you have all this. So Vaughn, normally for us in certification, we already announced that, hey, with the intercloud fabric, we knew it's going to be replaced by the Cloud Center. Okay, and we showed you where it's like, hey, they're going to actually switch the questions from the intercloud fabric to Cloud Center. Just find all the equivalents for that, and you'll be up and going. And that's exactly what we did. Showed that. So Vaughn, you would think we'll do the same thing here. And so it's like, all right, so here we go. We'll just go down and take a look at what's going to be replacing this particular service. Okay, so you got to go through, you got to read, you got to keep reading, and then you finally get to that. Oh, on right here. Okay, product migration options. Yes, we are ready.
No.
Until you read, yeah,
Until you read the
yeah.
next sentence.
There is
like,
no available, no replacement available right now. Okay,
oh, that's
for this,
good.
yeah, that's pretty much the last standard line for this. Now, Vaughn, even though we did get really at least from the exam manager herself with the intercloud fabric says, yeah, this is what's going to happen. You shouldn't see anything on intercloud fabric on the exam. Okay, it should all be Cisco Cloud Center. That should be happening here. Well, what about this instance, though, Vaughn? Okay, now we have something. It's clearly called out for the exam that we've got to know some details about it. Okay, but Vaughn, there is no replacement available for this thing. Yeah.
And you don't have any insider knowledge
And
or anything?
I have
of
no
asking?
insider knowledge. I have looked to see if anything's actually replaced it. So far, this is the last word on it so far. So I could not actually find anything else that's doing this. So
we need to know this for the exam for right now, but maybe real world applications
not so easy.
Might not be so great to go ahead and get in there now.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way that we have to treat this, right? Now, I can and I can only tell you this from just past experience. When something like this happens where they've essentially said, oh yeah, this product doesn't work anymore, you might see it as a potential answer, but usually not about the product itself. Now, I can't tell you that 100% for sure. I can't tell you that they won't ask you about the idea of VACS. I wish I could, but I can tell you that at least in my particular past experience on stuff that has been end of life for a while now. So this one's coming close to 2 years now, or a year and a half or so. Yeah, let's say 2 years now. Okay, when something like this starts to happen, you might still see it as a possible answer, but probably in the context of you're answering something else, and they want to see if you actually think it's going to be this particular concept. So think about it as seeing it as a list of other things that might be there, but it's probably not going to be the answer you're looking for.
And again, just like with all these tests, you have to understand the concept behind this. Like top level, they're probably not going to go too in depth, but
Right.
all of these like bullet points that you have in the show notes and what you've already talked about, just file it away. Know that this is what it is and will soon was doing, and just be aware of it and be ready for it on the test just in case it pops up.
Yeah. So let's go over some of the details of this thing that's no longer supported, because you got to know. Okay. So let's look on my screen again. And we've looked at this in another episode already. I kind of went through it very quickly because I knew we were going to backtrack through this again. So I didn't want to spend too much time, even though I probably went too deep anyways, because, well, that's just what I do, just talking. So, Vaughn, when it comes down to the virtual application container service that we have available, it really is made up of multiple products here, okay, that bring everything together. Over on the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you have the PNCSC, which stands for the Prime Network Services Controller. Okay, the Prime Network Services Controller gives us the ability, of course, to control configuration and installation and licensing of our virtual networking services, as well as we begin to create what we call a security profile. Okay, so we can actually go ahead and we can now create a security profile. Security profiles, of course, are the configurations for security that we want to actually be implemented within our particular service. Okay, is what we want to be able to do. Okay, so everything that you see right here essentially represents that idea of that container service that we were talking about. The other thing, of course, is right down here where we have this Nexus 1000V. The Nexus 1000V gives us that ability to create VLANs if we actually need to, okay, VXLANs. It can, of course, provide the vPath that we were talking about, as well as the VEMs here, our virtual Ethernet modules. So remember, all that's really inside of the fabric of the Nexus 1000V. In other words, it's not an actual physical container. That's why I have kind of almost grayed out or dotted images here. All this is actually within one single software package, as what we also see. And more importantly, we have access to the virtual supervisor module too. Okay, so when we have this particular security policy that we want implemented as well, okay, we go ahead and we create that in our Prime Network Services Controller inside of course, our virtual application container. And then if we implement that virtualized network service, such as the VSG, okay, we can now go ahead and apply that service, that security policy to the actual VSM. We can apply it up here inside of our virtual security gateway to identify them. But then we can create this. Okay, now there's no actual icon here. I was just using it as just a container here so that we could see something. Okay, the administrator that's administrating this is going to go ahead and apply the SCO1 to the VSG and the VSM. So we'll go ahead and be able to send that over. And so you see the icons that I put up there to represent that security policy. But then the Nexus will create this, which is a port profile, okay, policy for us is what it will do, okay? Or vPath port profile. I just want to make sure I was saying that right, okay? So now, once we get that particular security policy and the port profile, we need to combine them together. And when we do so, that creates that vPath port profile, okay? So when we go ahead and we get access into that VSM, which we did show you in an earlier episode, we can go ahead and create that port profile. And from that point, it's also directly connected to each of these Ethernet modules here, okay, that we have. And those can tell the port profile, how do I gain access to VM10 or VM11, VM20 or VM21, okay? It doesn't matter. It can actually tell them how to do that and also apply the actual security policy into that vPath port profile as well. And from that, we can actually use that to help us to create that port group in vSphere. Okay, so that is what it does. So it's a little bit of a convoluted way of doing things, but there's no direct way in the cloud, Vaughn, to actually doing this. So that's what's happening is that they're communicating with these devices saying, I know where those are. I know where these are. When you create that port profile, then we'll actually go ahead and allow that to be added into the port group. From that point, we'll now go ahead and make sure that we understand that that can be used later on. So we'll go ahead and we'll actually make a port group of it. Administrator will create that port profile in the VSM, tell the VEMs how to reach the VSG, and also put that VSG in, or excuse me, that SCO1 into that vPath profile, and everything will work the way that we need to, so it actually establishes communication. And then it is here, the vSphere will apply it to the interface that it needs to. So you and I don't have to go into every single instance here, to every single interface to do this. The vSphere then can actually, on the port group, say it's going to apply to the Ethernet 10 port, and that way, all that will actually be combined here, okay? Now, once that's done, Vaughn, this is, once again, how we were talking about this using the idea here, of course, of our traffic steering, okay? Notice the reason why these things can communicate, Vaughn, is because all of these are actually in the path of that port profile all together. so they can all communicate and do exactly what we need to, because that port profile is actually applied to all of them, so it can have that reachability that we want. Now, Vaughn, even though we use that virtual security gateway, okay, because it was just a simple device that we had, we can do the same thing, exactly the same thing with that virtual application container service, and we could switch that for the Cisco ASAV 1000V. We can switch it for the CSR 1000V. Okay, all these are virtual networking services that can simply be switched and put into place. We can use also the NetScaler and have that same thing apply, as well as our wide area acceleration services. So all of these actually give us that ability to do what we need to do. Okay. Now, Vaughn, we have one more thing to talk about here at the end, which is a little bit more challenging to understand. Okay. Once everything is done, okay, what essentially ends up happening for us is that we end up inside of the VACS here. Okay, the Virtual Application Controller. Yeah, make sure I'm telling you right. Yeah, I am saying that right, am I? Yeah. Okay, so just making sure I'm actually saying that right. Yeah. So the VACS here. Okay. So once we actually get everything running the way that we want to, the way that we build the VACS is all together in one package is that we go ahead and we follow a particular template, which we call a 3-tier application container. The 3-tier application container, of course, includes the services that we want to run. Okay, it includes the VEM. Okay, it includes the CSR 1000 to do what we need to do, and there's the additional service as well. External IP addresses, of course, are how we reach that container. Okay, the management addresses is how we connect to these devices, of course, to manage them. Makes sense. The internal addresses are how, of course, they actually connect as a single LAN together. So that's what happens too. Now, these containers can be used in a couple of different situations. Okay, if we create what we call an internal container, the only thing that's ever exposed out to the internet itself or any other place outside of it is that we would actually say, here's the only thing that's exposed. So even though I have a virtual security group that has this in a zone, it will go ahead and it will create an opening just to the web application server, okay, is what we can do. So that means all the internal components are actually going to be underneath that one security policy and we'll be fine, but we'll leave it open just for the web services so that they're not going to get access to. If I make everything external, though, Vaughn, what will now happen is that all three of my particular services, the web, the application itself, as well as the database, right? The web server, the app itself, and the database, all of that can now be exposed all the way out to the internet. So you can create these templates and say whether they're internal or whether they're external templates if you want to. And of course, you can even create a customized VAC as well. Okay, so to do this, you would actually create application tiers. Instead, you can actually say what goes in there. You can create our tier network too. So layer 2 segment for isolation as well. So you can actually create those if you need to. Security zones and even your application layer gateway. And that will allow you to do the traffic inspection that you need to. So all those are actually very customizable if you need. The recommendation, of course, is to use as many standards as you can, because once you start to do all these custom virtual application containers, it becomes a little bit more nightmarish in terms of service level agreements that you have to do, because that now means you're having to customize everything for every one container that you have. So most companies, like what we showed you, for example, again, I'm using Office 365 here, they didn't say we're going to meet every single demand of every customer. What they said is, here's generally what you have the ability to select between, okay? You're either going to need this or you're going to need this. But what about if I need it in between? They're saying, well, you just pick probably the better one. In other words, the upgraded one instead of actually picking the one that's going to give you less. So that's usually the way that you do that because you don't want to be managing every single SLA that has to do with custom VAC containers if you do. Now, Vaughn, even though all that sounds neat, okay, the real neat thing about this, Vaughn, is let's say that you create this for one of your cat customers that we were talking about, okay? Well, Vaughn, you realize something that, hey, other of your, customers that are in the cat business, which is, to me, is very strange, others might actually need the very same services again. So the great thing though, Vaughn, is now that you've created it for a single customer, if you've done a custom template here, you can actually reuse those templates. Okay. And that's the greatest thing of all. Vaughn doesn't have to go in and recreate every single time. She can now take that and actually apply it as a template to all the other customers that need the same thing and just keep everything else the same. So the reusability, regardless of where they are, is actually key for us too. And the ability, of course, inside the cloud to be elastic in the way that we talked about, these virtual application services and being able to do everything that we've talked about so far in this series. This is where we do see kind of the ultimate product that we end up delivering out to the customer, but it shows us a little bit about the background. Now, on all that, right? And even though we barely scratched the surface, I really just described what's going on. It still doesn't explain all of the technical features that have actually gone on in the background to make all that stuff work together. So there's still a lot that's hidden in the background or obfuscated so that cloud services say, look, yeah, you just need to access it and say what you need to do. You don't have to understand how the underlying technology works. You just tell us what you want to do and you configure it. There's enough of that that you have to be able to do and make it work. But you don't have to understand how they've connected everything together and how they actually made sure that it's all working. But they've just gone ahead and done that in the background. Devon, this is another one of the pieces that fits together for the entire Cisco solution. Even though it's end of life right now, you're still going to need to know for the exam. That's why we spent the time that we needed to on just this one technology.
All right, great information to know about, even if we might not be using it for that much longer, but that's okay. We're studying for an exam, and that's one of the main reasons of why we're going through this series, and to just know what exists. So thank you so much, Ronnie, and thank you all for watching, but we're going to go ahead and sign off for IT Pro TV. I've been your host, Vaughn Smith.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.